We're about to have a special treat tonight. Mark Levin is going to be, I think, grilled by his former boss, Ed Meese. We've got Ed Meese and Mark Levin with us, and it's going to be I can't wait to hear the two of them talk about a lot of things that we are curious about. I think you've noticed, as usual, when we're out here at Tyson's and Ritz-Carlton, we've had incredible service from the staff, and we'd like to take a moment to recognize them. And it's really obvious you all care about your work. I mean, it's just a real pleasure to be with you. Thanks for making this such a hospitable dinner and great service, and you're great people, and it's just been great. And we'll be back, so we're looking forward to seeing you again. Okay, well, the staff now gets to take some time off because we won't be serving dessert here. As is usual on Saturday night, we're going to have a dessert afterwards. You may have noticed that Art and Bonnie Alley are not with us this weekend. They're currently in Florida celebrating Timothy Plan's 25th anniversary, along with Ken Blackwell. Yet Art has still sponsored an ice cream sundae dessert reception this evening. So let's raise a glass for Art and Bonnie, continued support and generosity, and we look forward to seeing them back at CNP in October in New Orleans. This next introduction is very special for me. I'm here tonight most likely because of what happened in 2010. I was attending a conference, a Coke conference, in fact, and we got together and worked on a plan to make the Republican congressmen do what we wanted after they were elected. And I joined a meeting that Ed Meese was chairing. It's called the Conservative Action Project, and Ed asked me to join. And I was surprised and honored, and I want to thank him for getting me involved in this. It's been a great adventure. Ed, I think you all know, needs no introduction. He's the Ronald Reagan Distinguished Fellow Emeritus at Heritage Foundation. From 1985 to 1988, he served as Attorney General of the United States. And from 1981, he was counselor to the President. Mr. Meese is a senior executive committee member and past president of the Council for National Policy and founding chairman of the Conservative Action Project. Mr. Meese and his wife Ursula live in McLean, Virginia. Ed, an American hero, always the smartest man in every room that I'm in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for that very warm welcome. It's great to be here. Great to have the opportunity to participate in this final session of what has been a great meeting here. A time when we have learned an awful lot. The time when we have been honored by having key members of President Trump's team join us, some of them still with us tonight here. There's one I want to mention, by the way. Paul Teller is with us tonight. You know, every team has a most valuable player, and I can tell you this, on Mr. Trump's team, President Trump's team, Paul is certainly one of the most valuable players that we have. But tonight it's particularly my pleasure to introduce and then engage in a question and answer conversation here with one of my closest friends and a man who has already become a national hero to not only all of you, but all of those who listen to the radio and those who watch television. He is an outstanding, there used to be a term for a football player, a triple threat. He could throw, he could catch, he could run. Well, Mark Levin is the triple threat player of the conservative movement. He is on radio, he is on television, and he writes books. And that's triple threat. And I'm just very happy, and I know you are, to know that the threat that he is to the left. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to go into a detailed biography because you know a lot about Mark. See, I'm going to ask him a couple questions about his past and how he got involved to where he is today. But I just want to say this, that please join me in one of the most important advocates for the conservative cause, Mark Levin. You go ahead. You go.
You're the first.
I'm the first. You go over there.
All right.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a conversation. It's not a speech. It's not a gotcha session.
No.
But it is an opportunity to talk about some of the basic issues of today and to see what Mark's ideas are. You hear these ideas and you hear them with varying degrees of intensity on his show between 6 and 9 every night. And it's really great to hear his perspective, because I mentioned that he is an author. Well, he's an author who writes his own books, But one of the things that are distinguished about his books is the fact that he's done the research to support the conclusions to which he has written, and the background information that we can all use as we take these arguments and use them on behalf of conservative causes. And so that's why it is so important to have him talk about some of the things that we'll be discussing here tonight. Mark, just kind of to kick things off, though, how did you first get involved in politics, and then how did you get connected with Ronald Reagan?
First of all, it's an enormous honor to be here with Ed and Ursula Meese. And honestly, he taught me most of what I know, seriously, about the Constitution, about integrity, about principle, and so forth. And it all started in a log cabin.
Well, that's right. I was afraid you were going to say it started in a I was afraid you were going to say it started in a manger.
I'll tell you what, I got to be careful. I'll tell you where it really started. I would watch TV. I'd watch Bill Buckley. I'd watch Milton Friedman. We miss these men very, very much. And things they were saying, even when I was 13, 14 years old, they had an impact. I'm from Pennsylvania, and we never experienced Governor Reagan's term, but we went to an event in Philadelphia, my older brother and I. It was Citizens for Reagan, as a matter of fact, and Paul Laxalt was the MC, and we sat there, and Ronald Reagan spoke, and my brother and I looked at each other and said, "That's a president, right there." Now, we've been involved in local politics. I ran for the school board when I was 19, and won, by the way. And they've recovered recently. Even then, I started the Committee for Tax Limitation, because they kept raising taxes. But anyway, you think I'm tough now. When I was 19, man, I was really a fireball. But anyway, so that's what caused it. And then as I would read about conservatism, you didn't learn any of it in school. But Reagan was the guy. And in 1976, the Pennsylvania Republicans weren't really going for Reagan. And there were about 20 of us, real young Turks, who got involved at the delegate level to try and get Reagan support in Pennsylvania. Reagan would eventually pull out of Pennsylvania, but he got 5 or 6% of the vote with write-ins, which was a big deal. And in 1980, we made another run at it in Pennsylvania. I'll tell you something funny. We have 2 seconds. When Reagan selected Schweiker, all the conservatives said, what the hell's going on here? Because Schweiker was very liberal at the time and very pro-union at the time. But I'll tell you what, after Reagan did that, Schweiker became a conservative, didn't he?
He did.
He was very solid across the board.
And became Secretary of HHS.
And did a very, very good job over there. That's it. There's nothing else dramatic about it.
And then you joined the...
I joined the Reagan administration.
Right.
Really starting with Tom Pauken.
Yep.
He ran for the House in the Dallas area. He'd lost. We became friendly. He was appointed to the Action Agency, which, by the way, we got rid of. It doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Yay! Matter of fact, a reduction of, we riffed 81% of the agency because it had Vista and all these other elements in there. And so when I was 23 years old, I started in the Reagan administration there. And when I got there, I was the first one there. It was all the bureaucrats and me. And there were boxes and boxes there. And I opened the boxes. There were thousands of copies of Rules for Radicals.
By Saul Alinsky. Yeah.
By Saul Alinsky, that Vista was paying for to send into poor communities to try and create these little revolutions that were taking place. So the first thing I did is throw them all out. I mean, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of them.
Right.
Today, they'd probably arrest me. I didn't know what else to do. I just threw them away. But I moved throughout the administration.
Right. Yeah. As a matter of fact, Mark, I think you were in 4 or 5 different agencies, and I was the lucky one to get him in the Department of Justice, and you were an outstanding member of our team there. And that
wasn't hard.
My good fortune. I think that most of the folks tonight would like to hear your views on a number of our hot issues today. We've learned a lot from the other speakers, and I'll refer to some of them as we talk about it tonight. But first of all, I think one of the topics that really we haven't had much of a chance because we haven't had any expert before, but you've talked a lot in your program, and you've been an outstanding analyst of what I call the Justice Department and FBI scandals that have taken place. And give us a little idea of some of your thoughts about what's going on here, because in my opinion, this is probably the greatest scandal that the Department of Justice and the FBI has had in the history of the country.
I think this is the greatest scandal in the history of the country. The biggest problem we had in the last election was the interference in the election by the Obama administration. Now, I'm not a code pink Republican. I think the interference by the Russians is a big deal. That happened on Obama's watch, and he did damn little about it. But the idea that senior-level FBI, senior-level Department of Justice, senior-level intelligence agencies would get involved in the election process, that they'd get involved in it early on, that they would put, yes, spies in the Trump campaign. We used to call them spies.
Yeah.
I guess that all changed under Bush and Clinton and Obama. Spies. And that they would abuse the FISA court the way that they did. Obviously, it was a concerted effort to prevent Trump from being president and to propel Hillary Clinton into the presidency. And one of the things that bothers me most about this is how Barack Obama's gotten off scot-free. There is no way, in my opinion, that he didn't know at least a big chunk of this. Mm-hmm. You should be booing, not applauding. But anyway, here's the thing. I cannot believe if you had a FISA application that involved the opposite campaign, that the president wouldn't at least be notified about it, or his chief of staff wouldn't be notified about it because of the potential explosive nature of that. Same with if you really believed, and they didn't, that Trump was working with the Russians, the idea that the president of the United States would know about it is absolutely absurd. And that president was really involved in a lot of things, and he knew a lot what was going on. He had the attorney general. You know, they attacked Bill Barr as being the attorney general for the president. No, that would be Holder and Loretta Lynch. They were really the attorney generals for the president. These are fascistic police state tactics. When you have your own government interfering with an election, when you have the president of the United States at the time who still hasn't been held to account, he hasn't been asked any questions, nothing. And the sitting president of the United States is the victim. He's the victim of this silent coup. He's the victim that he comes under criminal investigation Now he's under congressional investigation. Now they're going after his bank records and his tax records and his other financial, and not just him, family members. And they're subpoenaing his accountants and all the rest of this. You want to see tyranny? You're looking right at it, right now. So I would say we're very lucky to have Bill Barr where he is right now.
Right.
Because he knows what's going on, and he wants to get to the bottom of it. And if there's anything we can do to support him in every respect, we ought to do it.
Well, you and I both know Bill Barr from his fine service. He worked with me, with Ken Cribb, in the White House very early in...
Can I ask, where's Ken Cribb? That's our man right there.
That's right.
Sorry.
No, that's great, because Ken was a part of our great team that we had there. But it's interesting to note now, however, that as the investigation is getting closer and closer to the people at the top, it looks like people like Brennan and excuse me, and Comey and Clapper are now starting to point to each other and to determine who's the first one to be thrown under the bus. How do you feel about all that's going on?
Great. The rat's jumping a ship.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, Trotsky fighting with Stalin, and that's sort of. I think when I watch Jim Comey, I think you'll agree with me. I've never seen a bigger reprobate in my life. A man that had this kind of power, abused his power. The entire senior level of the FBI is gone, not because of Donald Trump, but because they've either committed crimes or other unethical violations. They've been leaking like sieves, and they got caught, and they're under investigation. Just think about it. The top FBI, the FBI director, the deputy FBI director, the general counsel of the, can you imagine this when we were at the Justice Department? Yeah. And by the way, almost minimal coverage by the Democrat Party media. Minimal coverage. They focus on Trump. And I said, Trump is the victim. Trump never had a honeymoon. They wanted to impeach Trump in April 2016. Before he was a candidate, they were talking about impeaching Donald Trump.
Mark, this morning in this very room, we saw an example of when you talk about tyranny. And we saw Jerry Corsi, who you know about, and the plight and the victim that he was. As I was listening to that, I don't think I've ever heard anything worse about what our government has done than what they did to Jerry Corsi. And even though I don't necessarily approve of the two individuals involved, but to have invasions of the home of Paul Manafort and Roger Stone with 20 or so armed men with automatic weapons knocking on the door at 6 o'clock in the morning with armored vehicles outside. Is that America? It just seems to me that ought to be part of the investigation. I hope that Bill Barr will include that. As a matter of fact, you might mention that on your radio program sometime.
Okay.
But it seems to me that it was not just the whole thing. First of all, to take a dossier that they knew was false and it was not verified at all, and to use that to defraud the FISA court, and then to use that and get it spread into the news media by sneaky means so that it would be delivered to the public without any revelation that Hillary's campaign and the Democrat Party was funding the dossier and all that sort of thing. So that's one thing. But to try to intimidate and coerce a person to commit perjury for their purposes, and to intimidate people to try to get them in a psychological state that they will lie about the president. To me, this is the malfeasance and criminal conduct of the worst kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know about the team Mueller hired, but it's that number 2 guy. He's the one, Andrew Weissman, and he has a history. He put Arthur Anderson out of business. 80,000 people lost their jobs. And he was using the same kind of intimidation tactics, made the same kind of arguments about obstruction of justice that they make in volume 2 of this report. One of the reasons they didn't bring obstruction against the president is not just because of the 2 memos the Department of Justice had. If they wanted to try and indict the president, they would have said, we tried, but the Attorney General said no. It's because the Supreme Court said they wouldn't be able to. It's a 2005 decision. Arthur Anderson, and nobody knows that better than Mr. Weissman, since he was the lead prosecutor in that case. That company went out of business. 80,000 people lost their jobs. He took that obstruction statute and stretched it beyond its limits. A federal district judge went along, a circuit court panel went along, and the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, 10 pages long, almost perfunctory, reversed. Those people still lost their jobs. That company's still out of business. Why would you hire the man that was responsible for that and make him the number 2? Because you want to get Trump. That's why. And that entire team was put together with the purpose of getting the President of the United States. You're appointed special counsel. You're supposed to, even if you're U.S. attorney, you're supposed to make sure the appearance of conflict doesn't exist. The number 2 guy was at the Hillary Clinton victory party. And others made donations. Others were involved in other campaign activity. One of them represented the Clinton Foundation and so forth. That Volume 2 report is a disgrace. The whole report is a disgrace. All the regulation says is they need to do a report, really a perfunctory report to the Attorney General, why you charged some people, why you didn't. It's not even supposed to be public. The Attorney General's bent over backwards to make it public. Little good that did. And they wrote that Volume 2 because they knew the Democrats took the House. They knew the Attorney General would release most of it. 98% of Volume 2 was not redacted. They just went on and on about what they thought should have happened, but what they didn't do. And now we have people in the media and in Congress pretending they're prosecutors that they would indict the President of the United States. When this is written about 50 years from now, this is going to be a huge disgrace, an absolute disgrace, how this president was set up. But I will say this, Ed, too. I don't know of another man who could withstand this and fight back the way this president did.
Right. All right, let's turn to the political scene today. We heard from one of our speakers this morning that politics is downstream from culture. And I think you have made some very astute comments about the culture on your program from time to time. You've had some great guests on your television program to talk about the culture, like Victor Davis Hanson and others. Give us your sense of the culture today, particularly what's happening with the generation that's now in college or just recently out of college, and how this is going to affect the future of the country.
First of all, my generation isn't so hot either, to be perfectly honest with you. When you look at Congress, it's filled with my generation. And I've never seen a dumber Congress in my life, to be perfectly honest with you. When you watch those Kavanaugh hearings, are these people dumb or what? I mean, apart from being, evil and all the rest of it, I mean, real low IQ stuff. And so, and then they want to run for President of the United States. On an agenda put together by a 29-year-old leftist. What was your question? Let me tell you what I think about this race coming up. They're so radical. They used to say, we need health care like the Europeans. Now the left in Europe is saying, we need to do what the candidates in the Democrat Party are doing. They're so crazy left. I think that helps us. I don't think enough of the country's gone over the edge yet where they're going to follow them. Part of the problem is it makes somebody like Joe Biden look like a moderate. Joe Biden is not a moderate. He's a very dumb man, but he's not a moderate. Well, he is. And Joe Biden is a very nasty man. He's trying to remake himself. Just remember what he did to Bob Bork and Clarence Thomas and a whole host of other people. He's the Harold Stassen of the Democrat Party. This is his third or fourth time where he's running. You and I remember Harold Stassen. This is the third or fourth time that he's running for President of the United States. I think he's very vulnerable. The president has a much better record for the people in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, and so forth than Joe Biden and Barack Obama did. And I think he was the vice president to one of the most destructive presidents, certainly in modern history, when it comes to this society. I think a lot of the racial tension, I think a lot of the sanctuary cities, the open borders, DACA, the lawlessness, the radical agenda when it came to taxes and so forth, Obama did enormous damage to this country, and including our foreign policy and our military and law enforcement, right down the line. And I think he has spawned politically this latest crop of Democrats. I think the president has a good shot, but he won't win unless we're really all involved, right up to our eyeballs, financially, activism, and all the rest. The other side is rabid. Our side is patriotic, and we need to step up and do everything humanly possible to support them.
Very good. Well, I think that was illustrated by a number of the speakers that have been here at this conference when they talk about some of the things that is happening on the other side. A good portion of the Conservative Leadership Summit, which was held a day before this conference started, was on the left. And one of the major obstacles to us who are conservative, and particularly conservative candidates, is the tremendous financial and funding structure that the left has developed over the years, and which is being funded by some of the worst people in the world. Soros being one of them, and people like that. Steyer, and you could go through the list of names. But they have been, unfortunately, effective in the past. The way they turned around the state of Colorado, for example, literally in one election, simply by using their money, financial resources. What do you see? How can conservatives, particularly, and Republicans, how can they conduct some similar way of raising funds and having some sort of an ability to counteract the tremendous advantage that the left seems to have, at least at this point?
I think we got to go back to basics, grassroots activities. We've got some very good groups that are working on that, Morton among many others. We got to get back into the colleges and universities, which don't really like us very much. But you have Charlie Kirk.
Right, he was here today.
Who is a great guy. And a wonderful organization. And others who are fighting at the college campus level. We got to get better at litigation, although we work very, very hard at that. We have a structural problem now. This is just my view. They have so changed the courts. They've so embraced the bureaucracy. They have such an iron fist control over the media that we're not just running against the Democrats. We're running against the government, we're running against the media, we're running against academia. The progressives have been enormously successful. They've devoured our institutions. They've poisoned our institutions. They only use the Constitution as a fig leaf to advance their iron-fisted agenda. You look at a lot of the court precedent, it's very bad. And so it's going to take strong, courageous people to fix it. And the question is whether we have enough left and whether there's enough Americans who care about this. I'll go back to Bill Barr. Bill Barr is not a controversial figure. He's a brilliant man. He's not a real right-winger per se or anything of that sort. He's just doing his job. And even a guy like that who's sitting there trying to do his job, and even on the report did more than he had to do, you're going to hold him in contempt. Now they're talking about putting them in jail. And I warned them on TV the other night. I said, Jerry Nadler, you don't really look like a tough guy to me. And Adam Schiff, you actually look like the opposite to me. But let me tell you a little secret. You may have a little jail in the basement of the House of Representatives. I think they call it the cafeteria. And you may have the Sergeant at Arms. Justice has the FBI. They got the ATM. You really don't want to get in a showdown with the Department of Justice. I forgot to answer one of your points. What was done to Stone, who I don't much like, but that doesn't matter. What was done to Manafort was disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. These are tactics you use for drug lords, mobsters, terrorists, some guy in a house holding his kids, kidnapping his kids. These are people who couldn't defend themselves under any circumstance. And you're sending SWAT teams in there, federal, state, local, with semi-automatic weapons and bullhorns and all the rest. Those are horrific intimidation tactics. That's what they are. They want these guys to buckle. They want to break them. They want to take all their money from them before they've ever stepped in court to defend themselves, before they've ever stepped in court in front of a jury. And that's what happened to those two men. What happened to Corsi was they wanted him to lie.
Yep.
They wanted him to lie. They wanted to put pressure on him to lie. They wanted to scare the hell out of him. They probably did. But he had the fortitude to say, I'm not going to allow this to happen to me, and I'm not going to allow this to happen to my family. I personally think this is why Lieutenant General Flynn one count of false statements, because they're going after his son.
Yep.
A father will do anything to protect his son. And I think they were going after his son. Look how they go after Trump's son. I mean, these are very diabolical individuals, and I hope, and I think everyone here understands, this is a fight for everything. This is a fight for our system of government, our system of justice, our belief in the Constitution, our belief in liberty. I look at this administration, I say, what the hell has the guy done? You got a special counsel, you've got committees, what in the world has the man done that deserves this kind of treatment? Nothing. And look at your media. We have the worst media in the history of this country. And I don't care whether it's yellow journalism or the party press of the turn of the last century or whatever it is. You have a media that is tied at the hip with the Democrat Party. You have a Praetorian Guard media that defends the power of the centralized state. And they aided and abetted those FBI senior officials who were leaking. Who do you think they were leaking to? They aided and abetted the Department of Justice. They aided and abetted these intelligence. Hell, they hired some of these guys, like Brennan and Clapper. I've never seen that. You got a former CIA director who's a commentator on criminal matters and everything like what? You got Comey out there. I have never, ever seen anything like this. And I blame the press. I blame the press. We had a real free press. If we had a real free press, they'd get to the bottom of some of these things. They'd be concerned about the police state. But they're so ideologically gone, progressive, social activists. The fact of the matter is, the president's going to be running against them too. They're part of the problem. I do have some good news, though.
Good.
There's always Bermuda. No, I do have some good news. We could take Bermuda. No. And the good news is this, and it's unfortunate. I think a lot of the media outlets today are destroying themselves. You can see the ratings going down. You can see the New York Times had to be bought by a billionaire, 20% or so, telecommunications billionaire in Mexico. The Washington Post had to be saved by Bezos. They're all suffering. CNN has no ratings. MSC has ratings because apparently they have a monopoly on televisions in insane asylums, I hear. Just like CNN has airports. But anyway, so, but I mean this, new technology, new platforms. I know people hate the internet. I love the internet. I hate what some people say to me on the internet. I hate some of the disgraceful people who are on the internet. But let me tell you something. To me, they're the new pamphleteers. I don't mean every jerk on the internet. I mean, this is what's going to break the back of the Democrat Party media. They won't be able to control it. Notice they keep trying to get their hands on it. Oh, net neutrality. It sounds so neutral. That's government control.
Yeah.
Whenever they say something, it's the opposite. Like the Department of Education is the Department of Illiteracy. The Department of Energy is the Department of No Energy. You know, you can go right down the list. But same with that. It's important that we have a strong internet. It's important that we have social media. It's important that people be able to do news, even citizen journalists and so forth. It's important you follow the right people and the right sites and do that sort of thing. And I think there's competition even coming further. I had George Gilder on my program on Fox many, many months ago. He's a great guy. He said all this is going to be gone in 10 years. Facebook and Twitter and all the rest. That the Israelis and the Japanese are working on a brand new, completely new type of platform. That this internet platform was originally set up mostly for communication, not commerce and that sort of thing. And you got to keep typing in passwords and typing in passwords. Well, they're developing technology where you don't have to type in passwords, that the information on this platform is so diffused that it's impossible for one person or one entity to what the hell do I know? I'm just repeating what George Gilder said. But I'm saying technology and new platforms and all, I think one day the old media is going to be the dead media.
Well, Mark,
Was that persuasive?
I think you've convinced us. But it is seriously, we have to pay attention to these things because they're not satisfied with just changing our ideas on politics, even changing our ideas in the culture. It's now the left is trying to intimidate people to use their language. They're changing the language, for example, and they're making it a criminal offense almost on college campuses and elsewhere if you don't use pronouns that they like, as opposed to what common sense tells you the appropriate pronoun might be. And so we really we're moving in the direction, or we certainly were moving in the direction under Obama, and we have the potential for us becoming a sort of a mental or psychological police state in the sense of what is forbidden to say or to think, because of the way in which the left uses this and makes victims out of people and uses victims to try to intimidate the rest of us, and as a result make it in some way that we should be punished because we don't go along with the falsehoods and the false language and the false terminology that they're trying to preach.
It's very important. We should stop subsidizing our own demise. So you got colleges and universities that get an enormous amount of taxpayer funding at the federal and state level. They never cut it. These are massive institutions. These are empires. We need to move. We need to develop a movement that is addressed. We need to go on offense and let them be on defense every now and then. We need to take back some of these college campuses. We need to be pushing for free speech, freedom of association on our college campuses. We need to undo tenure for these professors. I wrote another book called Plunder and Deceit, and I get into this at some length. And we need governors to get involved in this and state legislatures to get involved in this. And we need to make sure when we send our children to colleges and universities, I don't care what the name is, if they're pushing this propaganda, you're going to lose your kid. We need to starve them. We need to starve them. If they're going to act like Iran, we ought to treat them like Iran, and we ought to cut off all their economic activity.
Well, Mark, many of the good ideas that you've talked about tonight are available to all of the people in the United States because you've been such a prolific writer. And many of these things that we've talked about are reflected in your various books. And your latest one is one you've already referred to the subject at least, and that is the news media. And tell us just a little bit about the current book, how you did the research on this, and particularly what the book, The Unfreedom of the Press, provides for us in a sense of contending with one of the great enemies of the principal foundation and values of this country, the press.
I wasn't going to write about the press because I don't know anything about the press, but I decided I needed to write something about the press. If you're an American in this country and you're watching what's going on, this is an enormously powerful force. It's ubiquitous. Turn on TV, turn on radio, whatever. And so I decided to dig into it. And I'm not going to be able to get into everything here. But let me just tell you this. There's a difference between the media and a free press. We have a media. The free press is the pre-revolution printers, of which there were a handful. That was your free press. The pamphleteers, there were less than 36 newspapers prior to the Revolutionary War. A lot of the printers were on the run, and it wasn't easy. You've seen pictures of the heavy equipment and so forth, because the British would go after them. They wanted to shut them down so they wouldn't be able to speak. One of the great printers was Benjamin Franklin's brother, and Benjamin Franklin. I mean, Benjamin Franklin was a remarkable, remarkable man. But the pamphleteers were crucially important because you look at Thomas Paine, he was one of many, but there were pamphleteers before him even. And these pamphlets would be read, they discuss it in pubs, they discuss it at home, and the colonists, they weren't really the American people back then, the colonists would discuss these things. And there were about 2.5 million people in this, we call it the country now, in the colonies back then. 120,000 people had read Common Sense. And by the time of the end of the Revolutionary War, 500,000, 25% of the population of the United States. Right, you're talking about farmers and so forth. It had an enormous impact. And what were they pushing? First, they're the ones who pushed the revolution. They would write about Locke and Montesquieu and stuff like that. The media today don't even know who Locke and Montesquieu is. Marx, they know. Montesquieu, they don't. But, and the ideas about liberty and representative government and so forth, the great ideas, they were pushed constantly. And so that was the media then. And then it was followed by the party press media, where Jefferson and Adams really duked it out. And you had these newspapers. By then, you had about 1,000 newspapers. And they were very honest about what they did. They would announce who they supported and opposed, candidates, parties, causes. You can see some of that now. The Arkansas Democrat Gazette, obviously. The Arizona Republic was called the Arizona Republican, and you can get a feel for all that. It was pretty brutal how but they were very honest about who they stood for. But what happened to jump forward at the turn of the last century was the progressive movement. And they decided the American people, like they do with government, just too stupid to know how to fend for themselves. And so they decided they need to professionalize the press. And what did that mean? Walter Lippmann was iconic back then, and he explained what it meant. It meant a relative handful of people needed to decide what news was, to gather it, to digest it, and explain it to the rest of the nation, which was too busy or too stupid to understand basic facts and news on their own. But what really has changed in the last 30, 40 years, and especially since President Trump has been elected, is we're back to the party press, but it's a one-party press. You have a party press, you can't see a dime's worth of difference between the Democrat Party and the press. You don't even know who's leading who, but they're one follows the other. Many of the people, dozens of the people who you see on television on CNN, MSNBC, or work for the New York Times or the Washington Post, worked in Democrat administrations or vice versa. There's some Republicans, but nothing along the lines of the Democrats. Most of these people live in and around the Beltway, some in New York City and so forth. So by geography and ideology and party politics, there's no diversity. They debate about what the word objective truth means. They debate among themselves what it means, but some of them have actually come out of the closet and told the truth. And they've said, look, it's our job to move the ball. That is, to pick news that will have an effect on the country and drive it towards a progressive agenda. Thomas Edsall, former Washington Post leftist reporter, he basically says, we ought to admit it. We ought to admit who we are and what we do and so forth. And this is now being taught in journalism schools. So you have now news outlets and so-called journalists who are social activists pushing an agenda, and then they report on the agenda that they're pushing. Also, you have pseudo-events. The president calls it fake news, and he's right on. Pseudo-events. This was written about in 1961 by a brilliant man, Daniel Bornstein, who had been the head of the Library of Congress at one point. He got through, they didn't know he was a conservative, by the way, but he was at the University of Chicago, and he wrote a book on pseudo-events, fake news. And he says they create this fake reality. Well, look at the fake reality. We spent 2.5 years on Russian collusion. There is no Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. Then they move on to obstruction. Then they move on to constitutional crisis. Then they move on to impeachment. And he would argue, there's no news here. These are manufactured events around which they claim that this is news. And you can look at any study or poll, and you can look at the MRC research, you can look at Gallup, you can look at Pew, you can look at Shorenstein Center, all of them. You will find no study, no survey, no poll that says any media in the aggregate is right of center or center. It's all left of center or left. And so we have a big problem in this country. We have this force out there that we talk about what happened to Stone and Manafort, the way they could care less. Now, if it happened to somebody they like, then that would be a big deal. Spy, they would be jumping up and down about spy if this had happened to the Hillary Clinton campaign. What they've done is they've turned off half the country. The 80% of Republicans don't trust the press. 80% of Democrats do. Now, why is that? Because that's their press. So I make this distinction between the media and the free press. The free press, the First Amendment, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution belong to the American people. They don't belong to Comcast. They don't belong to Time Warner. They belong to the American people. And so we, the American people, need to not just have a discussion about this. We need a reformation when it comes to the media. And what do I mean? What I was talking about before. Let the bad ones die and let something else grow. And they are dying. And one last thing. Enemy of the people, the president says. He talks about a particular news outlet, or he talks about a particular journalist. And this Jim Acosta is writing a book, pretty much, as I understand it, that the President of the United States is the greatest danger to the media, maybe ever, but in certainly modern times. That's because he's a historical illiterate. You wouldn't expect him to know anything. And he goes to that press conference for the purpose of creating a controversy and then writing a book about it. Let me just briefly tell you this. I know we're over, but you look at the history of the press in this country. We had the Sedition Act, Alien and Sedition Act, 1798. You had the Sedition Act. The great John Adams, and he was great, threw journalists in prison and shut down some newspapers. And that's one of the reasons Jefferson ran and won the presidency. It was a very difficult battle. Jefferson was more of a libertarian. They got rid of the Alien and Sedition Acts. The media, the party press, the Adams and Hamilton press were brutal on Jefferson, but he still was a man of his word. He believed in free speech and freedom of the press, and they're linked. Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, he gave the authority to his Secretary of War, Stanton. They shut down 300 newspapers, and they put dozens of journalists in prison. You can argue one way or another. I'm just giving you the facts. Woodrow Wilson, one of the so-called great intellectuals of the progressive movement, even before he became really an accidental president in a three-way race. Woodrow Wilson put a new Sedition Act in place in 1918 as an addition to the Espionage Act of 1917. He shut down newspapers. He put journalists in prison. He put his opponents in prison. This is serious stuff. And not only that, he set up a propaganda wing for the government to influence the news and a censorship wing. And picking up from that was Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt sicked the IRS on publishers he disagreed with. Annenberg, Moses Annenberg, who owned the Philadelphia Inquirer and was a political power in Pennsylvania, was anti-New Deal, pro-Republican. The IRS went after him. He said, okay, at the end, I'll pay $8 million. And they said, no, we want you in prison. Because Roosevelt ordered his Treasury Secretary to put him away. Eleanor Roosevelt directed the IRS to audit Gannett, at that time was anti-New Deal, and so forth. You can look at the relationship between John Kennedy and Ben Bradley when he was at Newsweek. Kennedy's, Pierre Salinger shared FBI files at the direction of Kennedy with Newsweek and directed how the story would be written. I mean, Robert Kennedy, they act like he was passive. He wasn't. Agreed to the tapping of Martin Luther King. They didn't just tap him. Everywhere he went, he was followed. LBJ was even worse. LBJ put a tap on Hubert Humphrey's phones when he was running for president, his vice president, because he wanted to know where he stood on Vietnam before he would blurt it out, because it was very important to him. LBJ sent the FBI into the Atlantic City Democrat Convention to watch the Kennedy group. They bugged Martin Luther King's hotel to watch anybody in there who might be a problem to his, he thought at the time, his re-election effort. Barack Obama, his administration goes after Jim Risen of the New York Times, James Rosen of the Fox, 20 Associated Press reporters. And they say Donald Trump, calling them enemy of the people, is the greatest threat since Adolf Hitler. Now, let me tell you something. The American people need to be educated about this, because this is the lousiest media a free republic could ever have. We deserve better. And a little history lesson here and there and a little perspective here and there will help.
Well, Mark, we've just scratched the surface tonight on a variety of topics. But one of the things that I think people can take away is that your television program, for example, which is 10 to 11 o'clock every Sunday night, your radio programs, 3 to 6, drive time during the week, and your books are going to be a powerful influence to restore America, not just to make it great again, but to make it the citadel of freedom and the citadel of informed citizenship that we've had in the past and to which we want to return. And we thank you for being with us.
Let me just say, I stand on his shoulders.
Thank you.